What if I told you that the biggest love song of the last 20 years was never a love song at all? That the track you screamed in your car, the duet that sat on top of the planet for 7 straight weeks, the record that turned heartbreak into a billion-dollar fire, was actually a confession written in plain sight, hiding behind a hook so sweet that the entire world sang along to a crime scene? What if the woman who wrote the chorus was describing her own private hell, the man who wrote the verses was describing his, and the superstar singing it between them was living it in real time, with the whole world watching and nobody connecting the dots? Because that's exactly what happened. And once you hear this story, you will never hear that chorus the same way again. The burning house. The broken apologies. The line at the end that should have been a national scandal and somehow became a ringtone instead. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn about Eminem, about Rihanna, about the songwriter nobody remembers and the actress who gave away her paycheck is going to rearrange everything you thought you knew about the most dangerous song of a generation. Let's go back to 2010. Hip-hop is at a crossroads. The biggest rapper on earth, Eminem, has just clawed his way back from an addiction that nearly killed him. He disappeared, overdosed, flatlined in front of his own legacy, and now he's standing in the wreckage of his own life, recording an album with the most ironic title imaginable, Recovery. The world expects a victory lap. What it gets instead is something far stranger, far darker, and far more honest. Because buried in the middle of that comeback album is a track that doesn't sound like survival. It sounds like a hostage situation set to a beat. But here's what almost nobody knows. The song didn't start with Eminem. It didn't even start with a rapper. It started with a broke, unknown singer-songwriter named Holly Haferman, a woman the world would later come to know as Skylar Grey, sitting in a cabin in the woods of Oregon, financially destroyed, professionally invisible, and emotionally shattered by a relationship that had consumed her. She sat down with a British producer named Alex da Kid, who had almost nothing to his name either, and she wrote a chorus. Not a pop hook. A wound, dressed up as melody. Just gonna stand there and watch me burn. That's not a lyric. That's a survivor's testimony, and Skylar Grey has admitted in interviews that she was writing from inside her own toxic relationship, the kind where leaving feels harder than staying, where the pain becomes the proof that the love is real. Think about that for a second. The most famous hook in modern pop history, the line 2 billion people would eventually sing at the top of their lungs, was written by a woman describing the feeling of standing still while her own life caught fire. And the industry almost let it die in that cabin. Alex da Kid shopped the demo around. Doors closed. Nobody wanted it. The track was one rejection away from becoming a footnote, a song nobody ever heard, until it landed in front of the one man on the planet who was constitutionally incapable of ignoring it. And stay locked in on this detail, because it becomes the hinge of the entire story later. The original plan, according to Alex da Kid himself, was never even to put Rihanna on the record. The demo voice the world fell in love with was Skylar Grey's, and for a moment she was going to keep it. The decision to replace her would end up being the single most consequential casting call in modern pop, for reasons nobody could have predicted, and reasons that get darker the longer you look at them. Because when Eminem heard that demo, Eminem didn't hear a hit. Eminem heard a mirror. People forget who Marshall Mathers was in 2010. This was not a celebrity playing a character. This was a man whose entire career had been built on the radioactive fallout of the most toxic relationship in music history, his 20-year war with his ex-wife Kim. The marriage. The divorce. The remarriage. The second divorce. The songs so violent that she reportedly sued him over them. The onstage effigy. The public humiliation so extreme it became its own genre. Eminem didn't have to imagine the couple in that demo. Eminem had been both of them. So Eminem took Skylar Grey's chorus and built 3 verses around it that read less like rap lyrics and more like court transcripts. Listen to what Eminem actually wrote. I can't tell you what it really is, I can only tell you what it feels like, and right now there's a steel knife in my windpipe. That's the opening line. Not a boast. Not a flex. A man describing suffocation as his baseline emotional state. And then he does something almost no male artist had ever done on a #1 record. He confesses. In the first verse, Eminem admits, in first person, to laying hands on a woman. I laid hands on her, I'll never stoop so low again, I guess I don't know my own strength. Radio played that. Kids memorized that. And the culture mostly shrugged, because the melody was too beautiful to argue with. But the song needed one more piece, and this is where the story goes from dark to almost unbearably eerie. The chorus needed a voice. And Eminem chose Rihanna. Now stop and remember where Rihanna was in 2010. Just 1 year earlier, in February of 2009, the entire world had seen the photograph. Rihanna, bruised and swollen, assaulted by her then-boyfriend Chris Brown on the night before the Grammys. The image leaked, the media circus unrelenting. A 21-year-old woman turned into the global face of domestic violence, whether she wanted the job or not. And 12 months later, Rihanna walks into a studio and records a chorus about standing there and watching herself burn because she likes the way it hurts. Industry people raised eyebrows. Commentators asked whether it was exploitation or exorcism. Rihanna's own answer was simple and chilling. Rihanna said the song was authentic, that Eminem had basically written Rihanna's life, and that Rihanna connected to it immediately. Rihanna didn't describe it as acting. Rihanna described it as recognition. So now look at what this record actually is. A hook written by an unknown woman living through abuse. Verses written by a superstar confessing to it. A chorus sung by the most famous survivor on earth. 3 real people, 3 real scars, fused into 4 minutes and 23 seconds of pop perfection. Nobody manufactured that alignment in a boardroom. It was lightning, and everyone involved knew it, which is why the label moved fast, and in June of 2010 the song hit the world like a weather event. And the world responded in a way that broke the record books. Love the Way You Lie detonated onto the Billboard Hot 100 and then refused to leave, locking down the #1 spot for 7 consecutive weeks, making it the longest-running chart topper of Eminem's entire career. 7 weeks. A song about mutual destruction outlasted every summer anthem, every dance record, every safe and sanitized pop product the industry put up against it. Not Lose Yourself. Not any of the shock rap classics. A song about domestic violence, sitting on the throne of American pop while families drove to the beach singing every word. It went on to sell over 12 million copies, became the best-selling single of Eminem's life, earned diamond certification in the United States, and the music video would eventually climb past 2.5 billion views on YouTube. 2.5 billion. That's not a song anymore. That's a monument. But hold on, because we're not even at the part where it gets truly disturbing. The song alone was a phenomenon, but what the team did next turned it into a cultural detonation. They decided the video couldn't just be performers in front of a camera. It had to be a film. So they brought in Joseph Kahn, one of the most cinematic directors in the business, and they cast the couple at the center of the fire. And the casting was so pointed, so deliberately uncomfortable, that it detonated the moment it was announced. Playing the violent, magnetic, self-destructive boyfriend, Dominic Monaghan, an actor audiences had loved for years as one of the gentlest characters in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and on Lost. Playing the girlfriend, the woman standing in the flames, Megan Fox, at that exact moment arguably the most famous sex symbol on the planet, a woman the media machine had spent years consuming and discarding in public. And the video Joseph Kahn shot with them was not glamorous. It was a house, literally and repeatedly on fire, while 2 people who clearly can't live without each other also clearly can't stop destroying each other. The kissing that turns into screaming. The screaming that turns into grabbing. The grabbing that turns into the thing the audience is begging the screen not to show. And through it all, Rihanna stands in front of the burning building singing the chorus like a ghost who's already seen how this ends, while Eminem raps from a field like a man giving testimony after the verdict's already been read. Watch Rihanna's face in those frames. That's not performance. That's memory. The video premiered in August of 2010 and instantly became one of the most debated pieces of media of the decade. Domestic violence organizations were split down the middle. Some called it dangerous, a glossy romanticization of abuse that made a cycle of violence look like passion. Others called it the most honest depiction of that cycle ever put on a mainstream screen, precisely because it refused to flinch, because it showed the seduction and the horror in the same frame, because it understood that these relationships don't look like monsters from the outside. They look like love, right up until they don't. And then there's the detail that cuts through every argument, the detail most fans still don't know. Megan Fox, the woman the tabloids had spent years treating as disposable, took her entire paycheck from that video, every dollar, and donated it to a shelter for abused women. Think about the layers there. The most objectified actress in America, playing an abused woman, in a video about the most famous abuse narrative in pop culture, quietly handing her fee to the women living the real version. Nobody marketed that. She just did it. In a story full of screaming, it might be the loudest act in the whole saga. And the performances that followed turned the song into a live event monster. At the MTV Video Music Awards that September, Eminem opened the entire broadcast with it, Rihanna walking out of literal darkness to join him, and the building came apart. Then, at the Grammy Awards the following February, Eminem and Rihanna delivered it as part of a medley that folded in Rihanna's Part 2 and Eminem's anthem for his mentor Dr. Dre. A performance so raw that people inside the arena described the room as holding its breath. Every time this song appeared on a stage, it stopped being entertainment and started feeling like testimony. That's the level we're talking about. Now let's talk about the music itself for a second, because the craft underneath the chaos is criminally underrated. Alex da Kid's production is a masterclass in restraint, a clean acoustic guitar figure, a drum pattern that lands like a heartbeat that's lost its rhythm, and acres of empty space so the words have nowhere to hide. There's no wall of sound. There's no escape hatch. The arrangement forces you to sit inside the lyrics, and that is precisely why the record still sounds dangerous 16 years later. And inside that space, Eminem delivers what might be the most technically disturbing performance of his career, because each verse escalates the cycle with surgical precision. Verse 1 is the confession. Verse 2 is the diagnosis. Listen to how Eminem describes the mechanics of the spiral, and notice that Eminem switches into second person here. You, pulling every listener inside the burning house whether they want to be there or not. You don't even know what hit you at first. The warm feeling turns into sickness, promises turn into venom, and the rage takes the wheel while both people are just passengers. He even frames the good days in the language of comic books, casting himself as Superman with the wind at his back and her as Lois Lane, because that's exactly how these relationships feel from the inside. Invincible on Tuesday. Unrecognizable by Friday. And then comes the coldest line in the verse, dressed up as a joke. You don't get another chance. Life is no Nintendo game. A line about a video game console, sitting in the middle of a domestic violence narrative, because that's how Eminem's mind works. The joke is the trapdoor. It lands like a slap, because every person who's ever been inside that cycle knows exactly how true it is. Reset buttons don't exist. Apologies don't rewind the tape. And here's the craft detail almost nobody catches. Eminem never raises his voice in this verse. The horror is delivered at conversation volume, because Eminem is not performing rage anymore. Eminem is reciting a routine. This man has done this before. That's the part that makes your skin crawl on the 50th listen. And then comes the third verse. The verse that should have stopped the presses. The verse that radio stations played at noon, at drive time, at birthday parties. Eminem, voice dropping into that calm, reasonable, terrifying register that abusers and survivors both recognize instantly, delivers the apology. Baby, please come back. It wasn't you, it was me. The classic move. The manipulation so textbook it could be quoted in a counseling manual. And then, in the final bars, the mask comes all the way off. I apologize, even though I know it's lies. He says it. Out loud. The apology is a lie, and he knows it's a lie. And then the closing image, the line that ended the biggest song in the world. If she ever tries to leave again, I'm gonna tie her to the bed and set this house on fire. Let that sit for a moment. The #1 song in America, the song of the summer, the track that won the year, ends with the narrator promising murder if his partner tries to leave. And the genius, the dark, terrible genius of it, is what happens next. Because the moment he finishes that threat, the chorus swallows him. Rihanna's voice rises back up, gorgeous, wounded, serene, just gonna stand there and watch me burn. The horror and the beauty literally sing at the same time. The lie and the love occupy the same breath. That is the entire psychology of the cycle, compressed into 20 seconds of pop music, and no song before or since has done it with that level of nerve. Critics at the time didn't fully know what to do with it. Some reviews praised the honesty. Others worried about the audience of millions of teenagers absorbing a love song with a body count in the subtext. But here's the thing that time has proven. The debate itself was the point. Eminem has spent his whole career forcing America to have conversations it didn't want to have, and this was the ultimate Trojan horse. He didn't lecture. He didn't moralize. He seduced the entire planet into singing the inside of a violent relationship, word for word, and let the discomfort arrive on its own schedule. Now, here's where the culture war over this record really ignited, and it's a fight that's still burning 16 years later. On one side, you had critics and advocacy groups arguing that rapping domestic violence in a gorgeous, stadium-sized chorus was dangerous, that millions of young listeners would absorb the cycle as romance, that the fire would read as passion to anyone too young to know better. On the other side, you had survivors and counselors saying the exact opposite, that this was the first time a mainstream #1 record had ever described the cycle accurately, the seduction and the shame and the broken record apologies. And that accuracy saves lives because it makes the invisible visible. Both sides had receipts. Both sides still do. And the artists at the center of it refused to settle the argument, which, depending on who you ask, was either the bravest choice or the most calculated one. And the story doesn't end there, because 6 months later, Rihanna did something nobody saw coming. On Rihanna's album Loud, Rihanna released Love the Way You Lie Part 2, and Rihanna flipped the entire perspective. Same melody, same skeleton. But now the woman is telling the story. Now Rihanna sings the verses, and the opening line rewires everything. On the first page of our story, the future seemed so bright. The sequel reframes the original as one half of a conversation, the abuser's testimony answered by the survivors, and it quietly confirmed what many had suspected all along. For Rihanna, this was never just a feature. For Rihanna, this was testimony of her own, delivered in 2 chapters, on 2 different albums, in front of the entire world. Now zoom out and look at the crater this record left behind. Eminem and Rihanna became one of the most bankable pairings in music history, reuniting for The Monster, another #1, and a joint tour that sold out stadiums. Skylar Grey, the invisible woman from the cabin, became a Grammy-nominated songwriter whose fingerprints ended up on hits for half the industry. Alex da Kid went from an unknown producer with a rejected demo to running his own label. The song won awards, topped critics' lists, got performed at the Grammys in a medley that had the entire arena on its feet, and became the template for a whole generation of dark, confessional pop-rap collaborations. You can draw a straight line from this record to half the moody, trauma-bearing crossover hits of the next 15 years. The aftershocks kept coming for years. In 2014, Eminem and Rihanna took the partnership on the road with the Monster Tour, Eminem and Rihanna standing side by side in sold-out stadiums across the country, turning the song into a nightly communal ritual. Tens of thousands of people at a time shouting that chorus into the dark. Cover versions multiplied into the thousands. It became a karaoke standard, a talent show staple, a first dance at weddings that made at least a few guests deeply uncomfortable, and a permanent fixture on every streaming playlist built around heartbreak. Algorithms keep feeding it to kids who weren't even born when it came out, and they keep pressing replay, because the wound at the center of it never healed and never stopped being relevant. But the real legacy isn't chart positions. It's stranger and more uncomfortable than that. Love the Way You Lie is, statistically, one of the most consumed pieces of art ever made about domestic violence, and it got there without ever saying the words domestic violence. Millions of people learned the anatomy of the cycle from this song, the escalation, the false apology, the reset, the fire, without ever realizing they were being taught. Advocates have used it in classrooms. Survivors have written essays about hearing their own lives in it. And critics still argue, 16 years later, about whether it exposed the cycle or sold it. And maybe that's the final twist in this whole story. The song asks you, point blank, whether there's a difference between a love that hurts and a hurt that loves. It never answers. It just hands you the match and lets you stand there, watching the house, deciding for yourself which side of the glass you're on. 2.5 billion views later, the world is still deciding. So now I want to hear from you, because this is where the comments always go to war. Was Love the Way You Lie a masterpiece of honesty that forced the world to look at something it desperately avoided? Or was it the slickest piece of dangerous packaging pop music ever pulled off? And here's the harder question, the one nobody wants to touch. Knowing everything you know now, about Eminem's history, about Rihanna's, about what that last line really means, should that song have been allowed to become the anthem of a summer? Drop your take below, because I guarantee the loudest fight in this comment section is just getting started. And if you think this was the darkest secret hiding inside a #1 hit, wait until you hear what we dug up about the song the industry tried to erase completely. That story is even uglier, and it's already waiting for you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, because trust me, you're going to want to be here for that one.